Former Soweto scholar patroller Johannes Molefe has been acquitted on all charges. He faced a litany of charges, including raping and sexually abusing pupils at the AB Xuma Primary School. While reading out the ruling, the judge said the conduct of teachers, police and the teddy bear clinic contaminated the case. Let's get you more on this now. I'm joined from the newsroom by ENCA's Silindelo Masikane, who was following that particular case. So it would seem, Silindelo, that we had a whole trial of Johannes Molefe, but in the end, it seems it's the justice system that is now on trial.
Certainly, quite a scathing judgment, I must say, from acting judge Pete Johnson, really lambasting each of these parties that you've mentioned, teachers, the prosecutors, the police, in the manner in which not only was this case investigated, but in the manner in which it was prosecuted. He was quite clear to say that the state really failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Johannes Molefe was guilty of the crimes he was accused of.
In fact, you're putting it mildly, Silindelo. The judge talked about a comedy of errors right from the beginning, from how the case was investigated to how it was actually, the prosecution was carried out in court.
Most certainly. The judge really took his time going into detail, going through each and every count, and how there was really a lack of not only evidence, but just a thought process as to how these stories are not only not making sense, but that these minors were seemingly and possibly coached into saying the accusations that they were leveling against the former scholar patroller guard. He went as far back as to say that the manner in which the teachers had gathered the learners in groups and asking them, was the uncle at the gate touching them, that already was not a good sign on how this case was going to proceed. The manner in which statements were taken down, or the lack thereof statements, the lack of corroboration between statements as well as testimonies in court really had a lot to do with the judge's decision. He also pointed out how at that particular school, in fact, there are cameras in that school which are monitored by the principal, and for some reason that footage was not obtained to be used as evidence in court. He also spoke about the manner in which the teddy bear clinic had basically somehow influenced the children and their testimony, really lambasting them and saying that the role that they played was not a good one and really affected the case in a negative way to us.
And also we ended up with a situation where the initial number of complainants reduced drastically from over 50 to just 3 in as far as the rape charge was concerned.
Yes, I don't know if you can remember as far back as last year when the case actually broke out. We had as up to around 80 learners who had come forward from the AB Xuma Primary School, all saying that they had been touched in one way or another by this scholar patroller guard, and that number drastically decreased by the trial by the time it was ready for trial to 3 rape cases and 11 counts of assault. So it just shows you just how the prosecution was really trying to get these children not only to stick to their story, but that a lot of them couldn't, and they couldn't be really used in the trial as witnesses.
And Silindelo, we're going through these details perhaps to try and help people who are grappling to understand how this verdict came about. So it's important for us to go through as many of the comments of the judge as possible. What did the judge say about the investigating officer's conduct, and how this investigating officer was even assigned to this particular case?
He said that the manner in which not only the investigating officer conducted himself, but the way in which he was put on this case was really suspicious. He said that it was very strange how the investigating officer not only possibly knew some of the complainants, the suspects as well, but the manner in which this investigating officer conducted the whole investigation was really, it was not in a good way. In fact, when we spoke to one of the parents outside of court, they also said that the police had really disappointed them and let them down in the manner in which the investigation took place, because it has ultimately resulted in the acquittal of Johannes Molefe and these charges. In fact, today he will be walking out of court a free man with these charges being dropped. So the investigation, the prosecution as well was not had a lot of negative comments. The judge saying that the prosecution did not lead evidence correctly, saying that the evidence that was brought forward was actually not enough to prosecute, and saying that the onus was on the state to ensure that they could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Johannes Molefe was guilty of these crimes.
As it always is in criminal matters, Silindelo. So talk to me about reaction then, the Department of Education in Gauteng. What are they saying?
Disappointed, very let down by the justice system. The Gauteng Department of Education spokesperson Steve Mabona was in court. Let's just have a listen to what he had to say.
A lot of things that the judge has indicated, talking about the comedy of errors that have been committed by the police, prosecution, teddy bear during their process, including our officials, because the judge was very scathing on the prosecution. I mean, he went to an extent of, going through the code of conduct on how prosecutors need to conduct themselves, because he went to an extent of saying they probably elicited, some evidence or statements from the children. So quite sad for us, and it's an indication that when coming to training our educators, we need to do more, and we have already actually started with the process of making sure that we going to train our employees at our schools on when they see or when such cases are reported, on what is it that they need to do. Because the judge was very clear that the process of taking learners into the same classroom and asking them same question without even the privacy, it was an issue for the judge. So all those elements, we need to go back, as the department, to say, when you receive such a complaint, what is it that you need to do? How are you going to report it? Who's going to be taking charge? And when you involve the police, who's going to be doing that, so that you don't contaminate the case? Because the judge was very scathing to say the case was contaminated. There's contradictions, things that were said to parents and to the educators and to the investigating officers. So it was quite a dissatisfaction coming from all stakeholders who were involved.
Silindelo, hearing that, you can't help but wonder to what extent is what we've seen in this particular case systemic in as far as the investigation and prosecution of sexual offences is concerned. We are also in the process, of course, of trying to obtain comment from the National Prosecuting Authority. But you got reaction from the parents who had come through for this particular case. I imagine they're really disappointed.
In fact, right after the judge said the suspect is acquitted on all charges, there was literally just gasps coming from the gallery, people just quite in shock. We as the journalists were quite in shock as well. I mean, as I was listening to what the judge's comments, I could kind of sense that he could possibly acquit him on one or two charges, but I don't think anybody expected the judge to acquit him on all the charges. And so the parents were quite upset. A lot of tears flowed today, and we spoke to one of their representatives on behalf of the parents. Let's have a listen to what they had to say.
Parents are very disappointed, and above being disappointed, they are very devastated by the judgment made by the court, and we feel that the court was very unfair to the victims, because I understand there are processes, there are technicalities there, but then I think it was not proven beyond any doubt, because the judge concentrated more on the errors. He even mentioned a comedy of errors that took place. But then if there was an error that was committed, why should the victims be penalized because of the errors that were done, be it by the police or whatever the case might be. But on the same breath, we are very disappointed by the conduct of the police. And I want to emphasize this, to say from the beginning of the case, there were so many discrepancies that were done. We even raised this with the South African Police Service to say, number one, what criteria did you use to identify the investigating officer? And there was no clear indication. All what they said is that they identified him because he was on standby at the time. And a case of this nature was supposed to have been given to a person who with great experience, particularly on sexual offences cases, because most of the discrepancies, that is what they led to the collapse of this case.
All right, Silindelo, thank you so much for that update. I mean, I think it goes without saying that we are owed some answers, particularly by the prosecutors, the police who have been investigating this particular matter, and as well as the NGO, the Teddy Bear Clinic, who came out on the scathing side of that judgment today.